My name is Nora Malik, and for most of my life, I've been the girl no one noticed, not because I had nothing to offer, but because everyone was too busy looking at someone else. I'm 23 now, but sometimes it feels like I've lived double that, not in years, but in endurance. My story doesn't begin with tragedy. It begins with silence. I grew up in a house where noise equaled presence. Clara, my older sister, was a hurricane of applause, trophies, performances, and compliments. Every room she walked into somehow rotated to face her. I wasn't jealous. I just watched. Clara played piano. I drew in the margins of my notebooks. She got ballet recitals. I got asked to help serve tea to the guests. She received roses. I ironed her performance dress. And the worst part, no one thought this was unfair. Not even me, at least. Not at first. When I was 7, I won a district-level art competition. I remember the smell of the gymnasium floor, the nervous flutter in my chest as they called out the winners. I remember the small certificate they handed me, printed in cheap ink but glowing in my hands like it was gold. I remember running home, heart pounding. But when I showed it to my father, he glanced up from his newspaper, said, "That's nice," and returned to reading. An hour later, Clara walked in crying because she didn't place in her piano audition. My father immediately stood up, held her like she'd survived a war, and whispered, "You'll get it next time. You're special." I stood in the corner, my certificate limp in my hands. That was the day I understood something I couldn't yet name. There are people you clap for, and people you expect to clap. And I was expected to clap. It wasn't that they hated me. That would have been easier. At least hatred is a form of focus. I think they just never saw me. My mom, Leela Malik, is a school principal. You'd expect her to be the supportive type, the kind of woman who cheers for both daughters equally, who sees brilliance in the quiet child. But in reality, she was just busy managing students, busy organizing events, busy managing Claire's schedule. And my father? Well, he runs a small accounting firm. Practical, numbers-driven, and obsessed with return on investment. That mentality bled into everything, even parenting. Clara was an investment. I was an expense. And like any good accountant, he tried to minimize his expenses. But I wasn't just sitting idle. While Clara went to international piano summer programs, I saved up for online anatomy courses. I wanted to become a nurse, not because it was glamorous, but because it meant something. Healing people mattered. When I got into Brighton University, my parents didn't even attend orientation. "It's not like you're moving out of state," my father said, "and nursing isn't rocket science." Clara, on the other hand, got a send-off party with fairy lights and personalized cupcakes for her flight to Vienna Conservatory. I baked those cupcakes. I still remember the vanilla sugar sticking under my fingernails. My life at university was quiet. No flashy dorms, no shopping sprees, no parents visiting for weekends. But in that silence, I started hearing something else, my own voice. I discovered that I liked being reliable, that my professors respected me, that patients remembered my name, that sometimes a patient holding your hand and saying thank you is louder than 1,000 standing ovations. Still, every time I went home, which wasn't often, I'd be reminded of who I was not. "She's just a nurse," Clara once told her boyfriend at dinner, "but she's really sweet. Like, she brings soup and stuff." I stared into my plate, pretending not to hear. I wanted to scream. I saved a man's life last week by catching signs of internal bleeding before the doctor even noticed. But yes, sure, I bring soup. It was always like that. The better I did, the more invisible I became. Because my success didn't fit the narrative. Clara was the star. Nora was the shadow. But shadows grow, quietly, steadily, until one day, they cover the entire room. The breaking point came during Eid, of all things. It was supposed to be a celebration. I had just gotten an offer to join the trauma team at STT, Elora's medical center, a highly competitive placement for someone my age. My clinical supervisor even wrote me a recommendation letter with the phrase "future leader of her field." I printed it out, put it in a nice envelope. I thought maybe, just maybe, this time they'd be proud. At dinner, I waited for the right moment. I placed the envelope on the table and said, "I got into STT." Elora's dad looked confused. "What's that?" Mom blinked. "Is it better than Brighton?" "It's where the best trauma nurses in the state train," I said carefully. Clara sipped her drink. That's cool. I got offered a solo spot at the Vienna Winter Showcase. the conversation shifted instantly. Just like that, my moment collapsed under the weight of hers. I left early that night. Not with anger, with clarity. They weren't going to change. Not next week. Not next year. Not even on their deathbeds. But I was done shrinking to fit their story. That night, as I walked through the dim, silent streets of our neighborhood, a strange kind of peace settled in me. I didn't need them to clap anymore. I was building my own stage. And this time, the spotlight would be mine. I didn't plan to become indispensable. I just didn't want to be disposable. After that dinner, something inside me closed, not bitterly, not angrily, just permanently. A door that had been cracked open for years finally shut. I stopped expecting recognition. I stopped expecting recognition. I stopped bringing my accomplishments home. I stopped hoping to belong in a place that only ever saw me as a placeholder. And so I poured myself into work, into patience, into people who looked me in the eye and saw someone useful, even if they didn't know my name. St. Elora's was everything Brighton wasn't. Fast-paced, emotionally draining, endlessly intense, and somehow exactly what I needed. It was there, in the middle of a hecticer shift, that I met her. Eleanor Maddox, room 214, late 70s, pneumonia and an attitude sharper than the four needles. I asked for tea. This tastes like regret in a cup. I chuckled. It's hospital grade, ma'am. It pairs nicely with disappointment and beige wallpaper. She looked up from her tray and narrowed her eyes at me. You're not like the others. I'm not trying to be. Her lips twitched. Almost a smile. Good. Too many girls your age try to be liked. Gets them nowhere useful. That was the first conversation. It lasted 43 seconds and left a bigger impact than a decade of my mother's compliments, not that I could remember many. Over the next few days, I ended up being assigned to Eleanor more often than not. She was recovering slowly, stubbornly, and she hated small talk. We got along immediately. You don't speak unless you have something to say, she told me one morning. Rare trait. Dangerous in the right hands. I raised an eyebrow. Dangerous? Quiet people are the ones who win in the end. You ever watch chess? I shook my head. Doesn't matter. Just remember the queen moves silently before she strikes. That line stayed with me, not because I saw myself as powerful, but because, for the first time, someone else did. Eleanor wasn't just any old woman. She had once owned 3 successful elder care facilities in the state, widowed early, built everything from scratch, retired rich, alone, and allergic to sympathy. You think kindness is weakness, I said once, half accusing. She didn't deny it. No, I think most people use kindness to beg for approval. You don't. That's why I like you. She asked questions, real ones, about my life, my family, my work, and for once, I answered them. She didn't say, you poor thing. She didn't say, I'm sure they mean well. She said, they're idiots. But you're not. So what's your plan? I blinked. Plan? Don't tell me you're floating through life waiting for someone to notice how good you are. That's a fool's game, sweetheart. Build something. I'm just a nurse, she snorted. There's no such thing as just anything. You're already building. You just haven't realized it yet. The day she was discharged, she handed me a card. Plain white, no name on the front. Inside, I'll be in touch. Don't waste your spine trying to bend for people who won't even meet you halfway. Maddox. I stared at the words long after she left. And I couldn't help but think, no one in my entire family had ever said anything like that to me. Not once. 2 weeks later, she did call. I need help, not with health, with life. She explained that after retiring, she'd tried to support aging women in her community, running errands, organizing assistants, navigating paperwork, but she couldn't manage anymore. What she needed was someone younger, capable, trustworthy. Someone like you. I didn't even ask about the money. I said yes, not because I wanted a side gig, because for the first time in my adult life, someone chose me not because I was a convenient daughter or a responsible sibling or a backup plan, but because I was me. That's how it started. Every Saturday, I took the train to Eleanor's old craftsman-style house and helped coordinate everything: grocery deliveries for her elderly friends, medical appointment bookings, volunteer scheduling, community funding applications. She gave me full control, total trust. You're not my assistant, she told me. You're my executioner. I laughed. She didn't. I'm serious. I have 10 years left on this planet if I'm lucky. I want them used well. I want to disrupt systems. You're going to help me do it. And somehow, I believed her. Back home, no one asked where I was spending my Saturdays. They assumed I was working extra shifts. When Clara returned from Vienna after another failed audition, she spent most weekends filming reels for Instagram and crying over algorithms. Maybe I should do nursing, she told me once, half joking. It's not makeup tutorials, I said flatly. People bleed. She rolled her eyes. Whatever. You take everything so seriously. That's because I had no choice. Some people get to float. I had to swim with weights tied to my feet. One evening, after a long planning session at Eleanor's, she looked at me and said, "You know, if I were 40 years younger, I'd invest in you." I shrugged. I'm not a business. Wrong. You're the best kind of business. Underestimated, undervalued, and fiercely competent. Then she did something I'll never forget. She opened a drawer, pulled out a folder and placed it in front of me. My lawyer's working on a grant fund for community healthcare micro-projects. I need someone to run the pilot program, build it, shape it, scale it. She looked at me squarely. You in? My hands shook. What if I fail? She smiled. Then you'll fail forward. But you won't fail. Because girls like you, she tapped my forehead gently. You already survived worse. That night on the train back home, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I felt like a secret no one had noticed, yet a fire just waiting for oxygen. People don't like it when you change, not because they loved who you were, but because who you're becoming threatens the story they told themselves about you. I learned that the hard way. Eleanor's small community project began to grow faster than either of us expected. I helped launch a pilot program matching trained nursing students with elderly patients who couldn't afford proper care. We called it Bridge Hands. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't make headlines, but it made a difference. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just good at something. I was leading. At first, my family didn't notice. Clara was still the center of attention, as always. Her return from Vienna hadn't gone as planned. No contracts, no performances, just scattered auditions and rejection emails she pretended not to care about. Europe was overrated anyway, she said one night at dinner, scrolling on her phone. They don't know real talent. I didn't comment. I was too tired from writing a grant proposal and coordinating 3 caregiver schedules across 2 cities. But I didn't say that either. I'd stopped trying to prove my effort. The people who needed to know already knew. One Saturday, Eleanor surprised me with something unexpected. A dinner. Not just any dinner. A gathering of donors. You're the face of the program now, she said simply. People should hear you speak. I panicked. Eleanor, I'm not. You are. She interrupted. Stop shrinking. The event was held in a small gallery space downtown. Soft lighting, simple decor, no spotlights, just sincerity. I spoke for 10 minutes. About dignity, about forgotten elders, about quiet resilience, about what it means to be overlooked. People cried. Afterward, a woman from the city health board approached me. Have you ever considered expanding this to other districts? This could be statewide. I blinked. I hadn't thought that far. You should. And just like that, a door opened I didn't even know existed. Later that week, the event photos went up online. Eleanor had tagged me. I didn't think much of it until Clara burst into my room the next day holding her phone. What is this? I looked up from my laptop. What? This dinner. These photos. You're giving speeches now? Yes. For what? Elderly. Nurse stuff? I kept my face calm. It's a project I've been building. Her expression twisted. Why didn't you tell me? You've never asked about anything I do. She froze. I'd never said that out loud before. Neither had she heard it. You think I don't care? I think you care when I'm quiet. But when I'm seen, you get uncomfortable. That's not fair. Neither was being your background character for 23 years. She stormed out. For the first time, I didn't go after her. The next week, something strange happened. Mom asked me to join her at her school's career day event. We're showcasing local professionals, she said. Thought you could represent nursing. It took me a moment to process. She'd never invited me before. I'd be honored, I said simply. Was it real interest? Was it guilt? Or just politics? I didn't care. I showed up. I spoke. The auditorium was full of teenage girls, mostly from immigrant families like mine. One asked, "How did you become a leader if no one believed in you?" I smiled. Because I started believing in myself first, and I stopped waiting for applause. The room went silent, then a slow clap, then more, and suddenly they were on their feet. Clara had performed on more stages than I could count, but this was the first time someone clapped for me. When we got home that night, Mom was unusually quiet. As I stepped out of the car, she hesitated. "You know, I think I underestimated how strong you are." I didn't reply right away. Then I said, "You didn't underestimate me. You just never looked." She nodded, not angry, just sad. Maybe for what she missed, or maybe for what I no longer needed. Clara stayed cold, passive-aggressive comments, dismissive laughter. "You think you're some kind of community hero now?" She snapped once when she saw my name mentioned in a local article. I didn't answer, not because I was weak, because I finally understood what silence could mean. Not submission but elevation. She wanted a fight. I was building an empire. Let her throw stones. I was busy laying bricks. The final straw came at a family dinner. Dad made a toast to Clara for never giving up and continuing to chase her dream. "That's courage." I raised my glass politely. Then he added, "And to Nora, who's doing that nurse project thing. I think it's great that you're staying busy." The air froze. Eleanor's voice rang in my mind. "Don't waste your spine bending for people who won't meet you halfway." I stood up, glass still in hand. "I'm not staying busy, Dad. I'm building something that's helping hundreds of lives. And whether you understand that or not doesn't change its value." The silence was deafening. Then I turned to Clara. "And for what it's worth, I'm not in your shadow. I never was. You just cast a very loud one." I placed my glass down and left the table. This time, I wasn't sad. I wasn't shaking. I was free. That night, I called Eleanor. "I think I'm ready." "For what?" "To scale Bridge Hands. Take it public. Make it more than a side project." There was a pause on the line. "Good," she said. "Because your shadow just became someone else's sun." I never expected the moment that changed everything to happen in a grocery store parking lot, under a flickering light, next to a broken shopping cart. But that's where my sister finally cracked. Before I tell you what she said, words I'd waited my whole life to hear. "Let me ask you this. Have you ever watched someone who always had it all finally realize they were never built to carry it? If yes, you'll understand what came next. And if you've ever lived in someone else's shadow, hit that like button, because this story is for you." The first clue that Clara was unraveling came from our mother's voice. She never called me just to talk, so when her number flashed on my phone at 9:14 p.m., I knew something was off. "Nora," she said, her voice tight. "Clara's having a hard time." I stayed silent. She didn't get the role. Again, she's been home all day, refuses to leave her room, keeps saying things I can't understand. I almost said, "You mean feelings?" But I bit my tongue. "She asked for you," my mom added after a pause. That part stopped me cold, not because I believed it, but because I wanted to. I found her in bed, hair messy, mascara like bruises under her eyes. When she saw me, she didn't roll her eyes, didn't fake a smile. She said 4 words instead. I think I failed. The girl who had once said, "You're just a nurse," was now whispering like a child. I sat beside her without a word. She stared at the ceiling. "They told me I'm too stiff, not expressive enough, that my presence doesn't command the stage." She laughed bitterly. "Can you believe that?" I could, but I didn't say it. Instead, I said, "You've never had to try before. Everything just worked until it didn't." She turned to me. "And you? Did you always try this hard?" "Yes." Her eyes filled. "And did it ever feel like it would never pay off?" "All the time." We sat in silence. Then she said the one thing I never expected. "I think I might envy you." Clara started coming with me to Eleanor's on Saturdays. Not regularly, not consistently, but enough to notice the difference. "Everyone listens to you here," she said once, as I helped coordinate a community outreach workshop. "They listen because I've earned it," I said simply. She nodded, for once, no sarcasm. That's when I realized Clara didn't hate my strength. She just didn't know what it felt like to need her own. But not everyone was ready to let go of the old roles. Dad still introduced her at family events as our talented performer. Me, still the helpful one. It didn't hurt like before. Now, it just sounded outdated, like someone quoting a map that didn't match the landscape anymore. Then came the article. A feature on Bridge Hands was published in the local health journal. Headline: How one nurse built a system where the state failed. My name was on the cover, my photo, my story. Eleanor was thrilled. "You've earned this spotlight," she said. "Don't dim it for anyone but Clara." She barely spoke to me for 3 days, until she showed up at my apartment one night in the rain, soaked and shaking. "They're mocking me," she whispered, "online, saying I'm privileged, untalented, riding on family money, comparing me to you." I made her tea, and then I asked the question I'd waited years to ask. Why did it matter so much to be better than me? She didn't deny it. She just cried. I didn't know who I was without it. People say shame is like a fever, it burns until it either breaks you or breaks off. In Clara's case, it did both. The girl who once couldn't stand silence now sat with it. The girl who once performed for approval started asking questions instead. And the girl who once said I was invisible, now she was asking me to teach her how to see. A few weeks later, we were leaving a grocery store, her arms full of donation supplies for Eleanor's next clinic, when she stopped beside the cart return. "Wait," she said. I turned. She looked me dead in the eye. "I'm sorry." Not the performative kind. The bare, throat-tightening kind. "For what?" "For all of it. For not seeing you. For resenting you. For needing you." Only when I started to fall, I didn't answer right away. Because truthfully, I didn't need her apology to feel free anymore. But I needed her to know what freedom sounded like. So I said, "You don't owe me perfect. Just real." And that was the night I stopped being her shadow, and she finally stepped out of her own. Sometimes the loudest redemption doesn't come in applause but in silence, shared under a flickering parking lot light, between two sisters who finally stopped pretending. If you've ever been the less favored one, the overlooked, the underestimated, the quiet one who watched others shine, tell me in the comments. What was your turning point? When did you finally take the spotlight you always deserved? And if you're still waiting, it's coming. Just don't wait for someone to give it to you, because you were never meant to play a background role in your own life. I always thought my mother was just indifferent, but then I found the letter, and everything I believed about her, about me, about the patterns that shaped us, shattered. Before I tell you what it said, ask yourself this. Have you ever realized your pain didn't start with you, but was passed down like an invisible scar? If yes, what you're about to hear might hit too close to home. It was a Sunday afternoon. Clara was out. Dad was napping. Mom asked me to help clear out old boxes in the attic. She'd never asked me to do that before. Not Clara. Not the golden child. Me. It felt strange, but I went. The attic was suffocating, dust in the air, the soft creak of wood under my feet, light slicing through old blinds like a blade through memory. I opened a box labeled Leela 1992, my mother's name. Inside, faded journals, photos I'd never seen, a music box with a broken key, and tucked between two old certificates, a folded envelope, yellowed at the edges. No stamp, no address, just 2 words on the front. To my future daughter. I froze, hands trembling. I opened it. Inside was a single page, handwritten, not perfect, not poetic, but honest. Here's what it said. If you're reading this, I probably failed to say any of it out loud. I don't know what kind of mother I'll become, but I'm terrified it'll be the kind I had. I was never the favorite. Not at school. Not at home. My sister wore dresses. I read books. She danced. I dreamed. They called me the serious one. I thought that meant I was hard to love. So I married stability. I chose quiet. I buried my fire deep and wore expectation like a second skin. If you're like me, and I pray you're not, I hope you fight harder than I did. I hope you never let someone else's shallow vision become the ceiling for your sky. And if I fail you the way I was failed, I hope you forgive me. But more than that, I hope you break the chain. Love, or something close to it, L. I didn't realize I was crying until the ink on the paper blurred. This wasn't just a letter. This was my mother's ghost voice, the version of her I never got to meet, the girl she used to be before she became the woman who only ever looked at Clara. That night, I sat across from her at the kitchen table. I placed the letter between us. She didn't ask where I found it. She just stared at the paper. Then she whispered, "I hoped you'd never read that." "Why?" "Because it means I failed." I shook my head. "No, it means you forgot who you were." She looked up, and for the first time in my life, my mother looked small, not weak, not broken, just human. "I wanted so badly to be the opposite of my own mother," she said, "but I ended up repeating her in different clothes. I didn't know what to say. So I didn't try to fix her or forgive her. I just listened. And sometimes, that's the loudest kind of healing. Later that week, I brought the letter to Eleanor. She read it in silence. Then she looked at me and said, "You know what this is? A confession?" "No, mirror. One you get to break or polish." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means the next generation will either inherit the silence or the story." And in that moment, I made a decision. This wouldn't end with me. At the next community meeting, I added a new initiative to Bridge Hands, Daughter Circles, a safe space for women to share unspoken stories, inherited patterns, and generational grief. It started with 5 women. By the end of the month, we had over 60. They weren't just healing themselves. They were changing their daughters' futures, including mine, because for the first time, my mother came. She didn't speak. She just listened. And at the end, she hugged me longer than she ever had before. "Thank you for not hating me," she whispered. "I don't hate you," I said. "I just finally see you." And in that moment, the girl who'd written that letter in 1992 and the woman I was becoming in 2025 finally met. Not in blood, but in truth. If you've ever felt like your parents' wounds became your own, if you've carried burdens that weren't yours to begin with, tell me in the comments. What would you say to the person who passed that pain on if you had one page, one moment, one chance? Because healing doesn't always start with forgiveness. Sometimes, it starts with finding the letter they never meant for you to see. They say success speaks for itself, but sometimes success whispers and it still drowns out a lifetime of being ignored. When my photo appeared on the front page of Mid-State Health Weekly, I didn't feel proud. I felt exposed. But not because I had something to hide, because I knew who would read it and pretend they hadn't. Have you ever done something great and watched the people closest to you pretend it didn't matter? If you have, then you already know how this story ends. But the middle? That's where it gets interesting. The article was titled, "Young Nurse, Big Impact: How One Woman is Quietly Transforming Community Care." My name, my story, my face, in full color. They mentioned Bridge Hands, our elderly outreach expansion, the daughter circles, and even quoted Eleanor. She's building what the system forgot. And she's doing it without asking for permission. The piece got picked up by a regional news station, then a health podcast, then LinkedIn, then Instagram. Suddenly, my inbox was flooded. Nurses, daughters, strangers. One message hit me hardest. "I showed this to my mom. She cried." She said, "Finally someone sees us." I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't moved, because I had cried enough in my life for being unseen. Now, I was watching others cry because someone like them was finally visible. But not everyone clapped. My dad didn't mention it. "Mom, that's nice, dear." And Clara? She posted a vague quote on her story the next day. Some people only get attention when no one else is shining. No tag, no context. But everyone knew. It wasn't about the quote. It was about her not knowing who she was when she wasn't the only one being seen. Then something shifted. A woman named Melissa Redding, a council member in East Bryer County, reached out. She'd seen my work and wanted me to speak at a policy roundtable on healthcare access. I'd never spoken at a political event. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you're not just a nurse. You're an operator, a builder, and you have what to many people don't: lived clarity." I showed up. I spoke. And when I was done, one of the state health directors approached me and said, "Would you consider joining our advisory board?" I blinked. "Me? I'm 23. She smiled. "Exactly. You're not trapped in bureaucracy. You're building real results." I told Eleanor everything that night. She leaned back in her chair and grinned. "You're not in the room anymore, Nora." "What do you mean?" "You're the room now." Clara stopped coming to Eleanor's house after that. She didn't say why. I didn't ask. One night, I found her at home, sitting in the living room, scrolling through the article comments. She looked tired. She said, without looking up, "You've become the daughter they introduce now." I sat down beside her. "I didn't take anything from you, Clara." "I know," she whispered, "but something feels broken." I took a breath. "Maybe it's not broken. Maybe you're just finally looking at what was always cracked." She didn't respond. She just turned off her phone and walked away. Meanwhile, the spotlight kept getting brighter. I was invited to speak at Midwest Women in Health Conference, then featured in Next Gen Care magazine, then nominated for a Young Innovator in Nursing award. Still working, still coordinating, still building. But with each new email, each invite, I felt the weight, not of the work I could handle that, but of being watched, judged, measured, especially by the people who had always kept score and assumed I'd never make it past 0. One morning, I was heading out the door when Mom stopped me. She was holding a dress bag. "I bought this for your event next week." I paused. "The awards ceremony?" She nodded. "I know we've never done the whole red carpet thing. That was always Claire's world. But I thought maybe you should feel like someone cared." It wasn't perfect. It wasn't an apology, but it was more than I expected. "Thanks," I said, taking the bag. It was navy blue, simple, elegant, exactly my style, almost like she knew me. Maybe she finally did. At the ceremony, when my name was called, I didn't cry. But when I looked out and saw Eleanor, then Clara, then Mom, and even my father, standing stiff in the corner, I realized something. Legacy doesn't start with applause. It starts in the silence that comes after. When the room quiets, when the cameras stop, when you ask yourself, did I do this to prove them wrong? Or did I do it to prove I was always right to believe in myself? And the answer, when it comes quietly, firmly, is what turns survival into purpose. Later that night, Eleanor toasted me at a small dinner. "You're not just breaking cycles, Nora," she said. "You're building a new map. So girls after you won't get lost where we did." Everyone raised their glasses. Even Clara, even Mom. But the one moment I'll never forget, when my father leaned over after dessert and said, "I read the article. All of it." I looked at him. "I should have seen you sooner," he admitted. "I don't know what else to say." "I didn't say it's okay," I said. "Then start seeing now, because forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's refusing to carry someone else's blindness into your future." When my mother asked if we could host a family dinner, I should have known something was brewing. Not because she missed me, but because people don't host peace talks unless they know a war's already started. Before I tell you what happened at that table, what was said, what wasn't, and what finally broke, let me ask you this. Have you ever sat at a table surrounded by people who helped build your silence and watched them suddenly pretend they've always heard you? If yes, you already know how sharp a butter knife can feel when the truth is finally served. It was a Thursday night, formal, forced, floral centerpiece and all. Clara had just started working part-time with a local arts nonprofit. My parents were calling it her return to purpose. She'd invited a few colleagues. Dad invited some extended family. And me? I wasn't sure if I was the guest or the occasion. Mom met me at the door with that high-pitched tone she always used when guests were present. "You look lovely. That navy color really suits you." I smiled, politely. The house looked immaculate. New cushions, candles lit, polished cutlery. Like someone was auditioning for a second chance. Dinner started quietly. Small talk, wine pouring, Clara retelling a story from her nonprofit work about a donor event that got rained out. Everyone laughed. I nodded along. Then Dad cleared his throat. "We just want to say," he began, raising his glass, "how proud we are of both our daughters. Clara for her resilience, and for never giving up her dream. And Nora for making headlines lately." Laughter. "The polite kind. Really impressive stuff," he added quickly. "We always knew you'd do something special." And there it was. That word. Always. Like they'd never told me otherwise. Like they'd never looked at me like I was backup. I took a sip of water. Clara jumped in. "Dad's right. You're kind of a local celebrity now. Everyone at work's been talking about the article." "Really?" I asked. "What part of it?" "The part about building bridge hands from scratch," she said. "Not the part about financing it alone, or working 3 jobs while in nursing school." Or I stopped myself. The table got quiet, too quiet. Mom smiled tightly. "It's all impressive, sweetheart. We just didn't realize how big it had gotten." "You didn't ask," I said. Her fork paused mid-air. "I'm sorry?" she said. "You never asked," I repeated calmly. "For years, not once." Aunt Farah cleared her throat. "Well, we're just so proud now. Look at you." "Why now?" I asked, still polite, still sharp. "Because strangers clapped? Because my name's on paper now?" Dad shifted in his chair. "You're being dramatic, Nora." I blinked. "You've called me invisible for 23 years. I think I'm allowed a little volume." Gasps, nervous laughter. Clara lowered her head. Mom whispered, "This isn't the time." "No," I said, "because that's what you said at my high school award ceremony, and my nursing graduation, and the Bridge Hands launch, and the healthcare roundtable." I set down my glass. Maybe there just never was a time for me. Eleanor, sitting at the far end of the table, yes, she came, finally spoke. You know, she said softly, people often forget that silence is a decision. All eyes turned to her. And your daughter didn't raise herself in a vacuum. Dad frowned. I'm not sure what you mean. She means you saw her as backup, Clara said suddenly. The entire table froze. What? Mom said. You did, Clara continued, eyes locked on her plate. I was the show. She was the stagehand. Clara, Dad warned. No, let her speak, I said. She finally sees it. I do, she whispered. And that was when the real silence fell. The kind that can't be broken with silverware. The kind you don't come back from unchanged. After dinner, as guests left with nervous goodbyes, Dad approached me near the coat rack. You embarrassed your mother, he said flatly. No, I replied. I embarrassed you. Because everyone finally saw what I've always known. You're still our daughter. Only now that I'm profitable. He flinched. You think I'm proud of your success because it's public? He asked. I met his gaze. No, I think you're proud of it because now you get to look good. He didn't deny it. He just said, we made mistakes. I nodded. And I built an empire with the ruins. Later that night, Clara texted me. You said things I've thought for years. I'm sorry it took me this long. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then replied, we can't go back, but we can go forward with truth. Let me ask you, reader, have you ever spoken the words your family refused to hear even when your voice shook? Even when the room turned cold? Tell me in the comments. What was your dinner table moment? The one where silence finally lost. And if it hasn't happened yet, start sharpening your voice. Because when your truth finally sits at the table, they will never eat comfortably again. The apology didn't come in private. It didn't come with flowers. It didn't even come with eye contact. It came in a post, 24 words, 2 photos, and a caption that made my stomach turn. Before I tell you what Clara wrote, the words she never had the courage to say out loud, let me ask you this. Have you ever had someone hurt you, then try to repair it in front of strangers before they even acknowledged it to your face? Because that's what a public apology really is, a performance. And I'd seen enough of those from Clara to know the difference between remorse and reputation management. The night before it happened, Clara came to me looking pale. They're dragging me online, she said. I raised an eyebrow. For what? For being me. Not helpful, she sighed. People are saying I'm spoiled, that I mocked you, that I used our family name to get attention. I said nothing. They're calling you an icon, she added, and me a fraud. Still, I stayed silent, because I'd learned that silence, when chosen, was power. She lowered her voice. I need to do something. Fix it. You can't fix truth, I replied. She looked up, then helped me rewrite it. The next morning, her post went live. 2 photos. One of us as kids, me holding a drawing, her holding a trophy. One from last week, me speaking on a conference stage, her sitting front row. The caption read, for years, I stood in the light while my sister built her brilliance in silence. I didn't notice. I didn't ask. I didn't listen. Nora, the world is finally seeing you. I'm sorry it took me this long. Thousands of likes, hundreds of comments, people applauding her growth. I didn't feel touched. I felt tired, because growth without accountability is just rebranding. Later that evening, I received a text from a journalist I vaguely knew. Hey Nora, saw your sister's post. We'd love to do a joint feature to Sisters, One Redemption. Interested? No, absolutely not. I wasn't interested in playing co-star in someone else's redemption arc, especially when the script wasn't written with truth in mind. I didn't respond publicly, but when I saw Clara that weekend, she tried to hug me. I stepped back. You said it to strangers, I said, but not to me. She looked confused. The post was for you. No, it was about me, but it wasn't to me. Her voice trembled. What do you want me to say? I want you to say it when there's no audience, no likes, no narrative. She didn't speak, so I did. You want people to believe you've changed? Then start by changing what you do when no one's watching. She sat down, finally quiet, and for once, truly listening. The irony is, I wasn't angry anymore, because when someone shows up late to truth, they're not arriving for you, they're arriving for themselves. I had already moved on. I didn't need her post. I didn't need her apology, because I'd built my life on a foundation that didn't include being seen by people who only look when the lights are on. But I did decide something that day. I would stop allowing other people's guilt to become my burden. Just because someone was ready to heal didn't mean I had to be the one to hold the bandage. 3 days later, the university invited me to keynote their upcoming Youth Empowerment Summit. The same university that once printed Clara's face on their pamphlets and couldn't remember my name at orientation. Poetic, isn't it? I accepted. The theme? Quiet fire. How the overlooked build empires. I wrote the entire speech in one night. It ended with this. There's a kind of fire that doesn't crackle, doesn't scream, doesn't demand applause. It just burns until everything built against it becomes light. After the speech, someone from the audience asked, "How do you forgive people who only noticed you when the world did?" I thought for a long time, then answered, "You don't. Not always. You just stop living like you need them to." Applause. Real. Earned. Undivided. That night, Clara texted me, "You were incredible." "I mean that." This time I replied, "Thank you. I'm glad you see it." But I would have been incredible either way. Because validation is sweet but independence is sacred. And public apologies? They fade. But your truth, once claimed, never dims again. Let me ask you, have you ever received an apology that felt more like performance than penance? Did they want to make things right? Or just make things look right? Tell me in the comments. Because sometimes silence is not weakness. It's proof that you've outgrown the need for an audience. Some victories come with trophies, others come with locked doors. Before I tell you what happened at the award ceremony and what I did when uninvited guests showed up, let me ask you this. Have you ever had to protect your peace from people who once destroyed it, just because they now claim to respect it? If you have, then you already know. The hardest part of healing is not the pain, it's the boundaries. The invitation arrived in gold foil paper, elegant, heavy, Mid-State Women of Impact Gala honoring Nora Malik. A black tie event, 500 guests, media, donors, politicians, the kind of night people dream of. I read the invite twice before putting it away, not out of disbelief but out of clarity, because I knew what would follow. And I was right. The next morning, my father asked over breakfast, "So when is the big award thing?" I didn't look up from my tea. "Next Friday." Oh, a pause. Then casually, "We should be there." I set my mug down. "You weren't invited. We're your family. You weren't when it mattered." Silence. Clara tried to step in. "It's a big moment. I think we should support you." "You think support means showing up now that cameras will be there?" I asked. Mom sighed. "It's not about that, sweetheart. We're just proud." "No," I said quietly. "You're curious." Pride doesn't arrive this late. They didn't argue, which was worse than if they had. It meant they knew. And worse, it meant they hoped I'd still cave. But I didn't, because this night wasn't about who came. It was about who I finally left out. Eleanor helped me pick the dress. Slate gray, minimalist, sharp. "You're not a princess," she said. "You're a strategist." I smiled. "Think they'll like it? Does it matter?" She replied. It didn't. The night of the gala, I stood backstage alone. No nerves, no shaking hands, just a steady heart and a voice ready to be heard. They introduced me with a short video. Bridge hands, the community centers, the daughter circles, photos of me from 5 years ago, quiet, overlooked. Then came the standing ovation, and for the first time in my life, I didn't flinch under the spotlight. I fit it. After the speech, I mingled, shook hands, thanked people I didn't know, smiled at people who wanted selfies. Then I saw them, standing at the edge of the ballroom. My father, my mother, Clara, uninvited, unannounced, unmoved. I walked over. "Hi," I said simply. My mother opened her mouth, but I raised my hand. "I'm going to say this once and only once." They stood still. "You chose to be absent when I was building this. You don't get to be present now that it's done." Nora, Dad began. "You weren't there at orientation, not at graduation, not when I launched, not when I fell apart at a writing grant proposals with no funding." They looked uncomfortable. "Good. This stage wasn't built with your applause. It was built with your silence." Clara stepped forward. "I didn't know how to support you." "You still don't," I said. "But at least you've stopped trying to steal the mic." She flinched. I softened. "That's growth." Then I looked at my mother. "The next time you're proud, tell a mirror. Because the girl you ignored became a woman who doesn't need your validation." I turned to walk away, but then I stopped. "You're not banned from my life. You're just not VIP anymore." And I left them standing under a chandelier that looked brighter than they deserved. Back at my table, Eleanor lifted her glass. To every girl who once whispered her value, and now doesn't lower her voice for anyone, we toasted. To truth, to boundaries, to earned presence. The next morning, headlines flooded my phone. Nurse turned activist Nora Malik shakes the room. The quiet one takes the mic and doesn't give it back. From ignored to icon. The power of not needing permission. But none of them meant as much as the message I got from a stranger named Amira. I used to think being soft meant being weak. Then I saw you speak. Now I know softness is power with grace. And that was my real award. Let me ask you, have you ever stood firm when the people who once dismissed you tried to claim your spotlight? Did you let them in? Or did you finally draw the line they thought you'd never dare to draw? Tell me in the comments. Because legacy isn't just what you build. It's what and who you refuse to rebuild with. Some names are forgotten not because they're unimportant but because they were never spoken when they should have been. Before I tell you what I found inside that envelope, the one my mother left on my desk with no explanation, let me ask you this. Have you ever been remembered by someone only after you no longer needed their memory? Because this is not a story about revenge. It's a story about release. And the letter I found, it wasn't written to me. It was written for me. It came on a Tuesday. Ordinary, uneventful, chilly. I came home from a meeting with local health officials about expanding bridge hands to 2 new districts. The house was quiet. Clara was out of town, Mom at work, Dad doing whatever he did in the hours I stopped tracking. Then I saw the envelope. No name, no return address, just tucked between a stack of mail and a cup of cold tea. I almost threw it away, but something told me to read it. And when I did, it wasn't from my mother. It was from my grandmother, a woman I'd only met twice. The first time at age 4, the second at her funeral. Inside the envelope was a faded letter, dated 1994. It began like this. Leela, you may never read this, and that's okay. I'm writing it more for the daughter I hope you'll have someday. Not because I think you'll get everything wrong, but because I know what we've always gotten wrong. We love conditionally. We praise performance. We fear softness. I see it in you. I saw it in myself. If you have a daughter and she is quiet, or strong, or strange, or still, please don't forget to say her name when no one else does. Because that name may one day move mountains. And if you never speak it, she'll think she has to move them in silence. Love them. I read it 3 times. The first time, in confusion. The second, in grief. The third, in recognition. This was it, the missing thread. A woman I barely knew had seen the future I would inhabit and sent a warning back in time. But it never reached me. Because my mother never opened the letter. Maybe she forgot. Maybe she couldn't face it. Either way, the silence continued. Until me. That night, I held the letter and cried. Not because I was sad, because for the first time, I realized I wasn't forgotten. I was just delayed. The next day, I visited Eleanor. I handed her the letter. She read it slowly. Then she said, "Do you realize what this means?" "What?" "You weren't the beginning of change, Nora. You were the continuation of a woman who tried but didn't get to finish." I swallowed hard. "You're not breaking a chain," she said. "You're completing a prayer." Later that week, I was invited to speak at an all-girls high school. They'd been following bridge hands. One of their teachers had been helped by our volunteers. I arrived in a room full of 16-year-old girls in mismatched uniforms and wide eyes. They asked me questions about healthcare, leadership, ambition. But one girl, quiet in the back, raised her hand and asked, "What if no one ever says your name?" The room fell silent. I looked at her, then said, "Say it yourself, over and over, until the world has no choice but to remember." She smiled, and I knew another thread had just been tied. That evening, I came home to find my mother sitting in the living room with the envelope open. Her eyes were red. "You read it," I said. She nodded. "I should have opened it 30 years ago." I sat down beside her. "You couldn't. You weren't ready." She shook her head. "That's not an excuse." "No," I agreed, "but it's the truth." We sat in silence. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a notebook. My mother wasn't kind, but she wrote things down. She believed in what she couldn't say. She handed it to me. "Maybe now, you'll say what we never did." And I realized, some legacies are not made of gold or glass or applause. They're made of paper, torn, unopened, but still breathing. Let me ask you, was there someone in your family who tried to speak but never got the words out? A grandmother, a mother, an aunt, someone whose silence became your weight? Tell me in the comments. What would you say to them now? if they could hear you? What name would you speak back into the world? Because sometimes, the name they forgot is the one that saves the next generation. The woman I became was never meant to exist. Not in this family, not in that childhood, not in a world where soft girls were told to be quieter or tougher, but never exactly who they already were. And yet here I am. Before I tell you what happened in the final chapter, the choice I made, and the door I closed, let me ask you one last time. Have you ever surprised even yourself with who you became? Because you refused to become anyone else? If not yet, let this be your beginning, because my ending is yours to inherit. The day started with an interview, not a big one, just a podcast hosted by a social worker named Tara who'd seen one of my speeches online. She introduced me like this: our guest today is someone who started out as invisible and ended up shaping a whole system. Please welcome Nora Malik. I smiled. I used to flinch at compliments. Now, let them land. Not because I believe I'm perfect, but because I know what it took to earn them. During the episode, Tara asked, "What would you say to your 12-year-old self?" I didn't hesitate. "You're not hard to love. You're just hard for the wrong people to see." She blinked. I heard her inhale. We moved on, but I knew that one line had already reached someone listening. That afternoon, I visited Eleanor. She was sitting on her porch, a book in her lap, sunlight in her hair. "You know," she said without looking up, "when I met you, I didn't think you'd stay." "Why?" "Because girls like you are used to leaving before they're seen." I sat beside her. "I think I stayed because I got tired of being the one who always left empty-handed." She chuckled. "You're not empty now." "No," I said. "I'm not." She handed me a small box. "What's this?" "Open it." Inside was a key. "To what?" "To your own building." I froze. "What?" "I bought a space downtown. 3 floors. It's yours. For bridge hands. For the daughters. For whatever legacy you're building next." I stared at her. "I can't, you already did." "I'm just catching up," I cried. Not from sadness. From fullness. That evening, I walked by my childhood home. Just once more. Clara had moved into an apartment nearby. Mom was redecorating. Dad was quieter these days. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. I just stood outside, breathing in the memory of who I once was. The girl who baked her sister's cupcakes, who brought home silent awards, who watched people clap for everyone but her. She was gone now, but I loved her for surviving long enough to become me. The next morning, I stood inside the new building. Fresh paint, clean walls, no plaques yet, just space and promise. I walked from room to room, imagining what they'd hold: a training center, a grief circle, a kitchen for volunteers, a hallway for portraits of women no one clapped for until now. I reached the rooftop, looked out over the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and I didn't need applause, just air, and maybe a nameplate. Not because I wanted recognition, but because once, no one said my name. Now, they'd have to read it every day. That night, I sat with my journal and wrote, "You are the woman they forgot was possible. You are the name they didn't speak until it filled every room. You are the fire that didn't ask permission to burn." Let me ask you, one final time, who are you becoming? Not for your family, not for applause, not even for revenge. For you, because you get to choose who walks with you, who you forgive, who you outgrow, and which name goes on the building you build. So speak your name, build your legacy, and if they didn't clap when you needed it most, clap for yourself, loud, long, and without end. Because the woman you're becoming, she deserves to be seen, just like I finally was.